We've been looking at something that's really dear to my heart for the last few weeks, and I read this joke this week that kind of introduces it, actually, believe it or not. And it's that time of year when a lot of Irish jokes are going around, and this is an Irish joke, but it really does help introduce what I'm going to say, so bear with me. But there's this guy named Patrick, and he's got to go to a really important office meeting downtown New York, and he can't find a parking spot anywhere near where he's got to be, and he's going to be late if he doesn't get a parking spot. And if he's late, he's in trouble. So he doesn't know what to do. So he looks up to the heavens and he says, "Lord, take pity on me." He said, "If you find me a parking place," he said, "I will go to church every Sunday. And I will tithe all my money. And I will even stop drinking Irish whiskey." And then miraculously, out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere, a parking spot appears. And he looks up to heaven. He goes, "Never mind, Lord, I found one." And believe it or not, that leads into what I want to say, is the fact that we are so used to seeing things with our natural eye, we don't recognize what's going on in the Spirit. We don't recognize what's going on. Even people out there that are not Christians, that most, the study is that 99% of the people, when asked if there is a God, they believe there is a God. They believe in something that's besides what we can see with our natural eye. But we don't live like it. We don't live like it. We live according to what we can see and only what we can see. And what I'm trying to really stress to us is that what's going on in our lives, for the most part, there's a whole other thing that's going on besides what we can see. Besides what we can see. There's a whole other thing. People that irritate you, things that are going on, circumstances, they're all can happen and are happening for more than just what naturally occurs. So many times I start to get into an argument with my wife, and I catch myself now saying, "Wait a minute, what's really going on here? Who's my real enemy? Is it Linda? No, she's not my enemy. I may feel like it may seem like it when she doesn't agree with me, but that's not the case. There's something deeper that's going on, and that's what's really in my heart about all of these things." So we're really talking about spiritual warfare, who's our real enemy, and how to discern that. There's three things that we really need to catch a hold of. We need to learn how to discern what's going on. And folks, for those of you who are into this kind of stuff, it's not as complicated or mystical as you have made it out to believe. It's not hard at all. The Bible gives you complete, easy to follow instructions on how to discern what's going on in the Spirit. Okay? And then we're talking about our weapons, what God has given us to use for this battle, and we talk about our armor, what God has given us to protect ourselves. And while I'm saying these things, I want you to know that I am not a person of details. I usually neglect them, and sometimes when I neglect a detail, I tend to say things that I may leave a point out that bothers somebody. So for instance, the week before I talked about the fact that I shot a turtle, and I never mentioned the fact that we ate it. Thanks to Linda, I wouldn't have eaten it, but she made soup out of it. And we ate it, so I brought that up last week. Well, this last week, I actually, in so speaking about what's going on, I neglected that for some of us, talking about the fact that there's an enemy out there is a very fearful thing for us. It's a very fearful thing. We don't want to know about it. We don't want to have anything to do with it. But I just want to get into a little bit of detail about that this morning before I go on, because this is not something to be afraid of. This is not something. So when I was a little kid, I was in the 7th or 8th grade, and I don't know how tall I was, but I know that in the summertime between that grade and the next one, I grew 6 inches. June, July, and August. I went back to school 6 inches taller than when I had left school. And it was somewhere in Orlando, Florida. And I remember when I was shorter, before I grew, every gym period, every day, this big kid would come over to me and he'd pull my shorts down in front of everybody and laugh and everything. And I was afraid to death of him. And he was a bully. He'd just come up, just pull my shorts down. All the girls were standing around, and very embarrassing and everything. But I couldn't do anything about it because I was afraid of him. I was very afraid of him, right? Then I grew up. Didn't think about it all summer. I went back to school the very first day of the gym class, and I went, uh-oh. I remember this. Same place, same everything, same guy. The guy walked up to me, and now he's shorter than I am. And he looked up to me and said, "Are you David Scott?" And I went, "Yep." He goes, "Oh." And he ran. I was still afraid of him. In my heart, I was still afraid of him. I was still thinking he's going to pull my shorts down and there's nothing I can do about it. Because I was a little of 3 brothers. My older brothers are 6 and 8 years older than I am. They were much bigger than I am. And we lived in the basement. And basically, anytime they wanted to beat me up, they did. Yeah, poor thing. And so I was always afraid of these big guys, right? And when I went back to school, and I'm bigger, it didn't even occur to me to not be afraid. And so when he ran away from me, I was like, wait a minute. What happened here? What happened here? And I realized, wait a minute. He's now afraid of me. And I was afraid of him. That's the idea I want to put into your hearts today. That's the idea I want to put in your hearts today. You have no place to be afraid of the enemy. He's afraid of you. Yep, it's true. He is afraid of you. He's afraid of what you're going to say. He's afraid of what you're going to do. He's afraid of the effect that you're going to have on people around you. He's very afraid of everything about you, whether you know it or not. And if you can get that into your heart, that because of the grace of God and the power of God on your life, He's afraid of you, you will just go out knowing God loves me and I have power over the enemy. The following year, I went to another school. My mother, we were very poor, and we jumped around. Every time she couldn't pay the rent, we moved to another school district, another apartment. And I'm down in this place, and I remember the very first days of school, I didn't know anybody, and this girl paid attention to me. So, of course, I paid attention to her, and, I held her hand or something. And her ex-boyfriend came over to me, and he looked me straight in the eye, and he goes, "I'm going to beat the crap out of you, blah, blah, blah." And then he got this look of terror in his face, and he ran from me. And I'm like, he said he's going to beat me up, but now he's running from me like he's really afraid of me. That's what the enemy does. He talks to you like he's going to do this, he's going to do that, he's going to do this, but he's afraid of you. Remember that. And that's the thing that I learned when I'm walking through life. I wasn't looking for a fight. I'm not looking for a fight with the enemy. But I found that everywhere I go, if there were a problem occurred, just showing up, having the love of God and speaking His word, the enemy always fled. Enemy always fled. Please know that. There's nothing to be afraid of in the enemy when we talk about these things. He's afraid of you. Last week I also blurted out that Linda might have been a little lost her cool sometimes with the children. And I also we were up Corinth Friday night visiting Corey and Wayne and the kids. And Corey and Wayne are kind of going through a stressful time too, and trying to make ends meet, as so many of you know how that is. And got a couple of kids and so forth, just all the details of how difficult it is. And Corey said something at the table while we were playing a game, because Linda is the queen of playing games. And she said something, and Linda just muttered back to her. So I don't even know what she said. What did you say to her?
I think she tried, we were playing bridge, I think she tried to do something. She led from the king, you can't do that. I said, you didn't try to finesse, I said, you didn't lead from a king or something, did you? And of course, she said, oh my goodness. Mom's really smart or something, or Mom, you can't, I don't know. I don't know.
And then she said tablecloth or something?
Oh. For table talk.
She said, instead of saying the words table talk, which is a game word for you shouldn't be talking while we're playing because you're giving things away, she said tablecloth?
Yeah, she said tablecloth.
And what did you do?
I don't know.
Linda did what she always does. She just said something back to her, muttered something right back to her, and Corey started laughing hysterically. And what it is that her children adore her. Her children adore her. My grandchildren don't even know my name. Okay? My name is Where's Nani? Okay? Her children adore her. So I just want to say, if the mothers in this world were half the mother Linda was, we wouldn't have any problems. Okay? Okay, so am I out of trouble now for all you mothers out there? Okay. This week. until I start talking this week. Okay. So anyway, so we were talking about the first step is discernment. Now, it's not mystical. Learning how to discern what the Spirit is doing doesn't take some kind of mystical power. It's very clearly spoken. We started in Galatians chapter 5, and last week we started looking at the deeds of the flesh. Deeds of the flesh are very important to understand as they contrast to the fruits of the Spirit, which are also located in Galatians 5. And the deeds of the flesh will oftentimes spell out to us if something we're doing is not of the Spirit. In John chapter 15, you can read that on your own, but it's all about John chapter 15. Jesus said that if you abide in the Spirit, you're going to grow the fruits of the Spirit. If you don't abide in the Spirit, you're going to grow the fruits of the flesh. You will grow those things. You will become more impatient. You will, all of those things. So I just want you to know that. There's interestingly noted is that there's also I just kind of came across it this week. There's also kind of a new movement that's creeping into the church, and it's called the hyper grace. It's actually not called that. It's what some of us are calling the hyper grace movement. And what that basically is, just really, if I could bring it all down into one really simple, easy to understand sentence, is that God's grace, we know His grace and mercy covers all of our sins, and brings us into God's presence, His grace and His mercy. But this movement believes that it really doesn't matter what you do. You can do anything you want. God's not actually even asking you to change or to follow Him, that by His grace and His mercy you are loved and you will be with Him, and there's no point in changing. Yes, sir. Right. I read it. So, you know what's missing there? If God so loves us, and He does, by His mercy and His grace, He also leads us by His Spirit to grow fruits. For what purpose? What are the fruits of the Spirit? What's their purpose? Why would we want to have a fruit of the Spirit? Why do you want to have patience? Why do you want to have love and kindness? Why do you want these things in your life? Because the opposite things in your life are bondage. They drag you down. They make your life miserable. If you don't have peace, you have fear and anxiety. If you continue to walk in the things you've always walked in, and you don't follow God and be walking in His Spirit, you will constantly be plagued by these things. And we sing song after song about how God broke the chains of those things. It's not good to walk in those things. And if He loves you, He's going to draw you out of those things to set you free. That's the cool part of following God. That is the cool part. So we take a look at some of these fruits of the Spirit. And Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 is where they're listed. Every Christian should know that love is in 1 Corinthians 13. The fruits of the Spirit are in Galatians 5. Two main part of the Bible you should really, really know. And it says that one of the first fruit of the Spirit is love. Love is the first. I'm not going to really, you know what? We could easily spend a week at least on each fruit of the Spirit. I'm just going to really mention a couple of things that are really important. And talk about love a little bit later, because the love of God is grossly misunderstood. So we're just going to kind of hit on that later. Fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy. Joy of the fruit of the Spirit is not happiness. It's not happiness. It's not something that makes you laugh. It's a state of being joyful, of knowing where you are going, why you're where you are, what's going on. It's a state of having this joy in your heart regardless. Let me just kind of give you a funny little story about that. I know where I'm going. I've seen it. I can't wait to get there. We're flying to Ireland about 5 years ago with Corey and Corey and Wayne and her kids and Linda and I, and was there anybody else with us? I don't even remember. Tommy. I think Tommy was with us. Tommy and Jody, and we're all flying. We're flying. Not Jody, not them. So it's a long farther going. Okay, so it's way back. But anyway, we're flying. And how many of you have ever been in an airplane when all of a sudden the plane shakes really, really bad? Right, like you hit something, and then it like you think, okay, well maybe it's over with, and then it just keeps going and it gets worse and worse. And it goes on for a couple of minutes, right? And it's really a scary thing, right? Right? Very scary thing, right? So Corey, she doesn't know what to do. She gets out of her chair. She comes over and she's in the aisleway and she gets down on her knee and she goes, Daddy, I'm really scared. I don't know what to do. And I said, Corey, listen to me very carefully. The best thing that could happen to us right now is that this plane would nosedive right down into the water and smash to smithereens upon impact, and we'd all die and go to heaven. And she looked at me and she went, I'm going to go talk to Mom. It's a true story. And she's walking away. I'm like, what's her problem? Joy of the Lord. And it kind of connects, that thought kind of connects with peace. The peace of God, it says, passes all understanding. It has no logical roots. We're always thinking about peace. Well, if I could just make sure that my car's not going to break down for this trip, I will have peace about this trip. That's not God's peace. God's peace comes when there's no logical reason to have any peace. And the opposite of peace is to be fearful and to be afraid. Now, I want to say this about fear, folks, because this is a huge thing for Christians. This is a huge thing for Christians about fear. Many of us are making decisions in our lives. We're making decisions every day and for the future in our lives based on fear. We're making decisions based on, well, if I don't do this, I'm afraid such and such a thing will happen. If I don't do this, I'm afraid of what will happen in my retirement. If I don't do this, I'm afraid of what will happen. I'm afraid. We're constantly saying that. We're constantly driven and motivated by fear. That should not be our motivation. Our motivation should be, what does God want me to do regardless? Regardless. Does He want you to take the trip? Take the trip. What does God want? Don't make your decisions based out of fear. That's how hard of a discernment is that? That's pretty simple, isn't it? God gives peace in His Spirit. Fear and anxiety comes from the enemy. Don't be motivated by it. Now look, there's a difference between fear, and you look in the scriptures and the Greek and everything, there's a real difference between fear and respect. We understand that. We teach our children not to run into the road. Okay? We have a respect for what's going to happen. But you can take that line and go take a step over that and become so obsessive about your children and all of that can happen to them that you begin to walk in fear instead of walking in what God has for you. Just be careful of that. That's what it's all about. Fruit of the Spirit is patience. God is constantly working on my life to give me more patience. But sometimes I run into somebody that actually has a worse problem than I do. It's rare, but sometimes. And on the way to work almost every day, in Malden, up this way, you go the back way to Catskill, on Route 9W, and I'd go up that road, and I'd say about once a week, because the timing has to be perfect, this girl in this tan-colored pickup truck that had Yankee stickers all over it would get behind me, and I usually do about 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. I'm sorry, but, I just kind of like push it a little bit. 40, speed limit 40, I'm doing 45, and this girl comes up behind me like she's doing 80, and then she will pass me regardless of where I am, like on a curve, on a hill, wherever it is, she passes me. And, I'm always up for a little challenge here and there, and a couple of times I actually said, why is she in such a hurry? Where is she going? So a couple of times I actually tried to follow her as she's doing about 80 miles an hour up 9W and so forth, and I couldn't even keep up with her. Well, lo and behold, we went to a party 2 weeks ago in town. We sat in this room because of Pete Gage, my friend of mine, who he just sold the Village Apothecary to his partner, and he's retiring. And we go to his retirement party, and we sit down at a table, and It's a table across from us, a couple we don't know. And then they begin to introduce herself, and all of a sudden, Linda, she elbows me in the ribs, and she goes, "Psst, that's the Yankee girl." And I went, "No way." How did you know? Oh. She knew her for bowling. So that's the Yankee girl. And I was like, no. So I began to talk to her about her driving habits. In a pleasant way. In a partying, way. Like, wow, you are really something behind the wheel of a car. Do you know that? Her husband started laughing and laughing. She has zero patience. She can't wait for anything. And it was just so funny. But you know what? Here's what I hear Christians saying. I've even had Christians tell me that this is how the Spirit led them. I just couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand it anymore. Or I just felt like the Spirit told me that I had to do something. I had to do something. Or waiting was not an option anymore. Waiting was not an option. I'm just saying, question that. Because that doesn't sound like a fruit of the Spirit to me. That doesn't sound like a fruit of the Spirit to me. One of the fruits of the Spirit is kindness. Jesus said to the Pharisees, even the Pharisees love those who love them. So I enjoy this thing that I see on the billboards, random acts of kindness. That's cool. Random acts of kindness. But this kind of kindness that God is talking about is returning good for evil. That's what this is talking about. This is talking about somebody who has insulted you or has done something against you, and rather than give them what they deserve, you give them something of God. That's kindness. That's what God is talking about. Goes along with goodness, which is the next fruit of the Spirit. It's mercy. It's undeserving grace. We often say to people, we say to somebody else, what has that person ever done for me? What has that person ever done for me? And the goodness of God is they haven't done anything good for you, but you're going to do something good for them. It's this fruit of the Spirit. Faithfulness. Faithfulness is doing something you should be doing, whether you feel like it or not. That's faithfulness. And you really know it's faithfulness of the Spirit when nobody else will notice it. You're still doing it. You really know. Nobody else might not even notice your faithfulness. That's a really cool thing. It can be towards unrewarding things. Gentleness. Fruit of the Spirit, gentleness. Here's what I've caught myself thinking and saying many times. It's a good thing for you that I'm a Christian. Because if I wasn't, I would knock you flat on your rear. That's just full of gentleness, isn't it? I'm telling you how gentle I am. If I wasn't a Christian, I'd be very volatile. No, it's not gentleness. Self-control. Here's a really important thing about self-control, because it really is a clear characteristic of God. Self-control. God doesn't force you to do anything. God doesn't force you to do anything. He asks you to do it. And it's all under your control. Self-control we oftentimes think about towards things that are tempting to us or towards things that are difficult to say no to. But self-control is also about saying yes to God. And God says, I want you to love this person. I'm going to exercise self-control and I'm going to go do what God tells me to do. Self-control is just as much about obedience as it is about saying no. Some people look at the time when Jesus went into the temple and he overturned the tables. And they say, see, Jesus didn't exercise self-control or gentleness. He was angry there. You know, I actually tried to look this up because that's what I normally do whenever there's any confusion in this, what seems to be a confusion in the Scriptures. I try to go into the Greek, I look up the Greek words, I start looking up their meanings and so forth, and it's usually very eye-opening, it's really cool. But in this particular regard, I found the word anger to be extremely complicated in any language that you can refer to it in, that the Bible is written in. It was just very complicated. It can go from anywhere, anything from just being not happy with something to be fits of rage. And the word just seems to be used discriminately, and it's very complicated to understand what's going on. But what I felt like when I was praying, it's like, well, Lord, you're not making this easy for me. What was Jesus doing? And I felt the Lord say to me, I watched them sell in my house for hundreds of years. And when he said that to me, I suddenly realized the patience and the gentleness and the self-control of God, and how he appointed a certain time for Jesus to demonstrate that God wasn't happy with that, and that nobody got hurt. Nobody got hurt accidentally because of the rage that went on. Jesus turned the tables over, and God demonstrated his unhappiness with something that had been taking place for centuries. That's self-control, and that's gentleness. And by knowing these things, we can have just as much discernment over everything in our lives and the lives of people around us as anybody else. You do not need to be a special prophet to do that. And I just want to end with the first fruit that I didn't talk very much about, and that is love. Everybody here thinks that they know everything about love, because we use the word all the time for everything. But you know what? I've often said this. When's the last time you actually heard a sermon or a teaching or actually someone talking about God's love in church besides in a marriage ceremony? It's pretty rare, isn't it? Isn't it pretty rare? You know why we don't talk about it a lot? Because we don't really know a lot about it. Because we have all these other things in our culture that tells us what love is, but we don't actually know a lot about God's love. Or we don't actually walk in a lot about it. And it's just but it's so simple. And it's so meaningful of what it really is. Linda and I, a number of years ago, sat down with this couple that were having a problem in their marriage. And we look back on it, and it's pretty funny. But we were sitting down talking with this couple and asking them what their problem was, and of course the wives are usually the first to willingly talk about all the problems they're having, because any survey you have, the men will rate their marriage as being like 7 to 8, and the women will rate it to be like a 3. And the guys have no idea why the women are rating it so low. So you sit down with a couple, and so what's going on? Why are you here? And it's really a miracle that the guy's there to begin with, because usually the women are the only ones who want to go. The men don't see any need for it. So anyway, so the woman starts telling us all these problems and that they're having, and so then the guy just kind of like adds a little bit. Well, but long story short, it was just really evident that they knew each other, but they didn't love each other. And it was even more evident that the guy actually didn't know anything about love. He actually didn't know how to care. He didn't know how to listen. He didn't know how to do things even if he didn't want to do them. He didn't know anything about God's love and about sacrificing his own will. He didn't know anything about it. And so once I got an overall idea what needed to be happening, so I started talking to this guy about love. Love is this. Love is that. Love is this. Love is that. The guy listened to me for about 15 minutes. I was trying to keep it concise and brief, give him the Reader's Digest version of love. And the guy listened to me for about 15 minutes, and then he said, let me ask you a question. I said, sure. He goes, you and your wife, are you guys, do you have a degree in this? Degree in what? Marriage counseling. Do you have a degree in marriage counseling? You guys actually know what you're doing? I was like, no, why do you ask? He goes, yeah, I thought so. He's trying to tell me about love. And then he walked out. And I thought, wow. So if I had a degree in it, then you might have listened to me. We don't want to listen about love because it's a very difficult thing to actually apply in our own lives towards one another. You don't need a degree in it, folks. You can read about it. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. But it's hard to apply. And we don't like to talk about it. So I just want to close with just saying that the better that we recognize these things, the better that you recognize the things that are of fear instead of a peace, the better that you recognize the things that are of impatience rather than patience, the better that you recognize those things, the better you're going to be able to start to discern what is going on around you. You're going to better recognize who God is, how God is, what God is, when He is, why He does what He does. And then with the passage of time, the fruits will begin to grow. And Jesus said that. You're going to know. People are going to know if you're my disciples by the fruit of the Spirit that you grow. We should all really be asking ourselves what fruits are growing on our branches. That's very, very, very good thing to know. I also want to just, one last little thing. We're going to also talk about the ways that we misjudge things and why we do that. But I want to leave you with this, that's in our life, in Lynn and R's life, we've had people literally discern whether somebody was walking in the Lord or not, whether they were right or they were wrong in their walk in the Lord, by whether that person actually lived or died early or lived a long life. We went through this one situation, and we were talking to people that loved us, and somebody died shortly thereafter, and the person said to me, well, we knew that you were in the Lord because that person who was against you died. And I'm like, okay, that's actually not one of the fruits. It's not one of the fruits here. That death is not how you discern these things. Stick with the fruits of the Spirit. Stick with the deeds of the flesh. They make it so easy to recognize what's going on around you and what's going on in your own heart. If you're here today and you've been really, and you're just like, yep, that's me. I've been doing those things. I've been motivated by fear rather than by the peace of God and where God would lead me. We just want to pray for you. We want to pray for you today. So I'm going to let Phil encourage you in that.